Good evening. Thank you all for joining us for the 2024 Llewellyn Davis Sani Innovative Practice Lecture, which is made possible through a generous gift from our alum and founder and principal of Llewellyn Davis Sani in Houston, Randhir Sani. This lecture celebrates innovation in practice and the kind of research that is shaped by the agency of architecture in the world to intervene through structures, cities, and communities. We are thankful to Randhir for encouraging us to push the boundaries of practice. So please join me in acknowledging Randhir and his wife Sunila for their support of this lecture series. Please stand up. Again, thank you to both Randhir and Sunila for their support. So speaking of our amazing alumni, please allow me just a little digression before we go into the introduction to the speaker tonight. I know that the end of the semester is around the corner, with the charrette week only 7 days away or so I want to draw your attention to one more lecture this spring semester. Our final lecture this semester will be delivered by our own Danny Samuels on Tuesday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. Danny will be retiring at the end of May after over 25 years of practice at Rice Architecture, and I do want to take a moment to invite you all to his talk, which I know will be amazing, and to publicly thank him for his service to our school, to our communities across Houston. So please join me in thanking and acknowledging Danny Samuels. I'm going to ask him to stand up. Yeah, until the end of June, sorry. Yes, absolutely. And more so on a research project we have going on. So, back to our topic for tonight. Our speaker tonight is Ambrish Arora of Studio Lotus in New Delhi, India. Founded in 2002 with Ankur Choksi and Siddhartha Talwar, Studio Lotus is a recipient of the 2018 Prix Versailles Special Prize for Interiors and AD 100 Awards, as well as also being a nominated firm for the Aga Khan Award. Their designs promote local materials and cultures while advancing inclusivity and accessibility. They intertwine context and history with the technical innovation and the haptic qualities of space. Working from master plans to furniture designs, the firm demonstrates a keen eye for detail across scales and programs. Their 2018 Krushi Bhawan government complex redefines the office building typology through building performance and program. The project employs a double-skin facade, low window-to-wall ratios, and staggered massing to lower heat gain and provide passive cooling, optimal air circulation, and mediated sunlight. The open courtyard functions as an inviting plaza to the public. The brick facade draws from the local handlooms patterns in Odisha, while the Dokra screens highlight the local artisans. Such wide-reaching references are not coincidental, as Ambrish Arora is somewhat of a Renaissance person. He has a diverse background in boat building, cinema, museum, and exhibition design, always looking beyond traditional confines of architectural practice to address the environmental and cultural demands of our time. In that sense, his innovation in practice is cultural, technical, and environmental all at once. Ambrish is actually not a stranger to Rice University. In the fall of 2022, he helped host Associate Professor Troy Schaum and his students in India, and I'm deeply grateful to Troy for establishing this bridge to Studio Lotus. As a way to continue this collaboration and conversation, Troy will kick off our Q&A portion of the evening and also moderate the questions from the audience soon thereafter. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming Ambrish Arora to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor, for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Llewellyn Davis Sani and the Rice School of Architecture for hosting me. Tara, Wafemi, and Judith Caldwell for your impeccable coordination and help. Stephen Fox, who gave me the most incredible architectural tour of Houston. And not the least Troy Schaum, who I first met in Jodhpur last year, or year before last. Someone whose incisive thinking I've grown to admire. Thank you for making my being here possible. Thank you all present here for giving me your time and your listening. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge all our collaborators whose contributions I include in this presentation: landscape architects, structural and MEP engineers, sustainability consultants, all our contractors and artisans, all the Studio Lotus team members, past and present, and of course, our clients, without whom none of this would exist. So I represent Studio Lotus. Currently, we are a team of about 110 working out of our studio in New Delhi. And even as we enter the 21st year of our practice, we still start each day slightly unsure, slightly unsteady, as we navigate our way through projects of different scales and typologies, exploring different ways of working to address emerging challenges. Through the early years of our practice, as we struggled to find ways to make a living, we found ourselves working much in the mainstream of commercial and private commissions. One thing that seemed to drive us was day after day find new ways of pushing beyond the expected in whatever it is we were working on: small shops, office interiors, or a small home interior to begin with, where the common thread for us was limited budgets and timelines. One way we found of overcoming this was to search for and harness whatever limited resources we had access to around us. A little bit, for those of you not familiar with the context of India, this map shows the incredible density of our population, with a population 4 times that of the US on an area that is 1/3 as much. So what you see on the far right is just one state of Uttar Pradesh that has a population that exceeds the entire United States. Yet, India's total carbon emissions currently are nearly half that of the United States. Its per capita carbon emission is 1/7 that of the United States at 2 tons of carbon dioxide per person versus 15 tons per capita in the US. Sadly, this is rapidly climbing year on year as we get developed. If India's per capita consumption were to rise to the US's level, God forbid, global carbon emissions would rise to an earth-crushing 150% of current levels. Mahatma Gandhi seemed to have predicted this way back at the time of India's independence. In order to further situate the context of our practice, I would like to go a little deeper into understanding the region. Even at 1/3 the area of the US, India has nearly the same number of climatic zones, making it incredibly diverse, generating 21 agroecological regions, which results in creating amongst the most diverse regional cuisines in the world, based entirely on local and seasonal produce. Culturally, there are over 2,000 documented artisanal craft forms still alive across the country, even though a lot of them are rapidly fading. We are home to 400 living languages with thousands of dialects. We are many countries in one. Our traditional lifestyles, which are mostly still vibrant and alive, are based on strong regional responses, creating multiple cultures that live in harmony with their context. Richly diverse, highly local, impacting language, rituals, food, clothing, and of course, building. A few examples, such as in Kerala on the southern coast with its hot and humid climate, where people's clothing is as porous and ventilated as the buildings they inhabit. The food they eat promotes cooling in the body, and a majority of the population still lives comfortably without air conditioning. Or here, in the Himalayan desert of Ladakh, with its cold and dry climate, where the high thermal mass of the mud walls, with small windows and yak wool and fur on their bodies, keeps people warm with very little artificial heating, while the salt butter tea keeps the skin supple and hydrated. Or then, the western hot and dry deserts of Kutch and Rajasthan, where straw bale roofs and adobe walls of the buildings and the layers of white hand-spun cotton on people keep the coolth in and the heat out, as the spicy food keeps the sweat glands active. And now, India is rapidly on the road to development, becoming globalized, causing a homogenization of aspiration as the global south seeks to play catch up. In our buildings, our food, our clothing, right down to the standards of comfort we aspire for, readily discarding indigenous wisdom imbibed over centuries. What then can we do differently today? Can we find ways to interpret the wisdom that surrounds us in a way that speaks to our collective future, giving us possible solutions? In our own little way, we've tried to do this through our practice, through values that begin to shape our work and our projects. We have always been a country of frugal means, of doing more with less. How do we build in a way that keeps handmade relevant at increasingly larger scales? Designing passive and low-tech versus going for high-tech solutions, bringing innovation within reach to a larger spectrum of population. Looking beyond just preserving historical structures and increasingly adapting ordinary structures for their embodied carbon. What does it take to do buildings that endure materially and that people continue to love? A lot of our clients are high net worth individuals and luxury brands. We recognize that we have a chance to influence aspirations for the mainstream, to create pride in the local. And for that, digging into the huge repository of craft that our country offers to create beauty using indigenous techniques, as we continually engage with how we could tread lightly on the planet, physically and metaphorically. I'm going to take you through a few examples showing how we have attempted in our own little way to address some of these questions. One of our earliest projects over 18 years ago was a small store for a leading Indian fashion designer at a luxury mall in New Delhi. This mall was the first home to the then new to India foreign luxury brands. These stores adjoining ours had budgets for interior fit-outs that were close to 10 times as much as what we were given. And we had only 90 days to design and build the store in. We took inspiration from Rajesh's design approach of using handcrafted techniques to create texture on his clothes rather than embellishment. We used a small team of ordinary welders, much like Rajesh uses his tailors, to create texture and pattern. They hand-welded 12,000 locally sourced scissors into 12 different patterns, which were mounted onto individual frames off-site and bolted on-site onto a light metal framework, which was inserted into the bare shell, which was painted white. All the services, air conditioning, and electricals ran outside of this lattice cube. The clothes were framed by this lace-like filigree. As you can see in the image on the right, the imperfections of the hand welding only added to the tactility of the space. I would say this was a fairly successful project in many ways, budget-wise, time-wise, and most importantly, in delivering a distinct brand proposition using a frugal, handmade approach. We scaled this understanding to a totally different level when we had the opportunity of working for a client building a boutique hotel that later spread its reach across various regions in India, which gave us a chance to interpret this approach of regional luxury in different contexts. In fact, this is the project where I met Troy and the students in Jodhpur. So this is the site in the walled city of Jodhpur in Rajasthan. It's a 6,000 square meter plot. As you can see on the image on the right, there are 3 derelict, unlisted 17th century buildings, which we inherited. Access to the site was through these narrow lanes, inaccessible by construction trucks. The lanes brought us to this old gate, which opened onto this spectacular view. The 3 old historic buildings had been occupied earlier by multiple families living in them, who had modified them crudely over time to suit their needs, but left them with little semblance of the original architecture. The program demanded 40 guest rooms. Our site plan looked at restoring the 3 historic buildings as anchors for the site, comprising the public spaces with the restaurant, pool, and spa, and the rooms then get built around them as 3 new buildings, which would retain the relationship of the old buildings with the central courtyard and the fort. That way, the first block becomes the second gateway to the site after the main gate, and the rear 2 blocks become the canvas for the 3 historic buildings, which in turn visually connect to the fort. We identified what could be removed from the existing buildings, peeling away layers of poor interventions, paint, restoring traditional details in stone and lime until the jewel-like form of these historic buildings emerged from within and started reconnecting their shared history in conversation with the fort in the background. The second more challenging part was designing the new blocks in a contemporary idiom. These buildings had to be west-facing because of views to the fort. We designed them as double-skin structures, like the traditional ventilated double-skin Charoka structures of the region. This is the development of the elevation of one of the new blocks. The fort-facing balcony's outer skin was conceptualized in stone to be openable by hand, and hence could only be 20 mil thick. We began by referencing traditional patterns for this elevation, which in the 20 mil thickness of stone could only have been achieved through a machine cut process because the hand carvers need a minimum of 50 mil to work with, else the stone would crack. In fact, the CNC process would have worked out even slightly quicker at a similar cost. However, the client and us agreed on staying authentic to the handcrafting process and chose instead to modify the elevation to a simpler, more graphic pattern that could be cut by hand in the 20 mil stone. Eventually, this worked out even better than we'd imagined, as it gave us a more graphic, contemporary elevation that you see on the image on the right, which then not only became a part of the balconies, but also the naturally ventilated circulation spaces, negotiating privacy and transparency, infusing the new blocks with a changing quality of light and shadow cast by the sharp desert sun. The most challenging bit was detailing the openable stone balcony shutter, 420 kilos of stone that needed to be moved by a guest. This was developed over a 5-month period with local millworkers and stone craftsmen to create this dynamic facade, which guests interact with, and the facade changes through the day, and in the night, the stone filigree feels like fabric as the 3 new buildings become lanterns framing the site. To breathe life into the smooth quarry-cut sandstone slabs, we turned to the craftsmen at site, and over multiple prototypes generated hand-chiseled patterns in situ, which translated onto the stone surface you see on the image on the left. These are 50 mil thick, 3 meter high, solid stone partitions from the neighboring quarry that divide the bathroom from the room, as you can see on the image on the right. These also find their place on the solid stone hand-cut perforated headboards for the beds, which also serve as a nightlight. The project works on creating a conscious dialogue between the old and the new, as it seeks to create a seamless experience of history and the present. We realized through working on this project that it is only when you have your eyes and ears to the ground and engage with local artisans on site, working with materials of the region, can you truly tap into the site's true potential. Our more recent studies on embodied energy have showed us that the same lattice stone panel, when it is handmade, carries about 1/6 the embodied energy as compared to a CNC machine-tooled one. In addition, you get the socio-cultural impact it has on reinvigorating traditional skill in the community, and of course, the very special organic feeling which only the handmade can give, all at the same cost as the machine-made in a country like India. It is important to note here that for us to tap into this hidden potential, we needed to move beyond the comfort of our drawing boards, trust the process and the wisdom of the artisans and other stakeholders at site, and be willing to let them co-author the final outcome. I'll take you now to a totally different context for the same client to build a 40-room hotel in Dharamshala, a region which is the home of the Dalai Lama up in the Himalayas, a project that's still under construction. With spectacular views of the Himalayas to the north and of the tea-growing valley to the south, the architecture here takes a totally different form while celebrating the same values of contemporarizing the vernacular. The building is designed to straddle a ridge, and we use the contours of the hill to create a single 220-meter-long building with 40 rooms. The red vertical spines that you see here are individual staircases that lead to the rooms in yellow, which are above and below the blue band at the ground level, which houses all the public amenities such as the kitchens, restaurant, and the spa. This way, the rooms have no corridor on either side and have balconies on both sides to enjoy uninterrupted views of the mountains to the north and the valley on the south, whilst being totally private from each other. The Buddhist monastery inspires the form with its silent, powerful rhythm, whereas the materiality is derived from the local village homes and temples of the region. We used waste slate from local mines, and the same group of masons who had worked with us in Rajasthan came in and honed their skills with local Himachali masons to build this sweeping form of the 200-meter-long building with its thick masonry walls that give the building thermal mass for its radiant heating system, give it its timeless expression that captures the rhythm and materiality that we sought to express. The southern face of the roof is entirely skinned with solar panels which feed the heat pumps. This is a view of the building as it peels away from the sloping hill and sits against the mountains. Here again, engaging deeply with the site and local material and skill spoke to our aspiration of giving the building a timeless expression that situates itself between the contemporary and the vernacular. Here's a short film to give you a sense of the scale of the building on the ridge. I'll move on to the third project for the same client, just to create another context and a slightly different brief. Situated between Jodhpur and Jaipur in Rajasthan again, on an 800-acre rewilded forest, a bioreserve on a private estate, with a 200-year-old rainwater check dam on which the original owners used to run a 12-tented property, which was seasonal. Business became unviable and our clients entered into a joint venture with the family to convert it into a perennial property. We opted for a simple curvilinear plan on the dam to up the room count to 16, with the public amenities at the right corner of the dam, which could be serviced independently. The section shows how we sunk the circulation on the forest side of the dam. This gives guests uninterrupted private balconies towards both the lake-facing sunrise and the forest-facing sunsets. Due to the fragile nature of the 200-year-old dam, we needed to create a building that was almost as light as the original tents and used almost no concrete. We had only 8 months to build out the whole project and designed a very light foundation system of precast hewn pipes filled with stone and lime, of which we took off the elevated framework for all the tents, which allowed us to run all the services under the slab without digging the topsoil. The roof is a double-layered waterproof heat-reflecting canvas skin that creates shaded overhangs on either side. That's the sunken path to approach the rooms. You move up, enter the tent as the lake gets revealed, taking forward the idea of unfolding thresholds from the Ras narratives. For the interiors, we worked with a young RISI-trained printmaker who spent weeks on a site sketching the flora and fauna of the region and converted that into a new intervention of block printing of the region. And she converted these sketches to these large hand-carved wooden blocks, which are 6 to 8 feet tall, which are then transferred onto the linen, which forms the tent, and further hand-embroidered with the migratory birds and animals that come to sight. Each tent has a different composition. We take the same narrative into the furniture, hand-carving the casings for the air conditioning units, custom designing the camp-style furniture, and having it made in native kikar wood, all of which come together as happy surprises of varying compositions. A view of the tent looking towards the forest where you enter from, a skylight that frames the brilliant night sky over the bed, and in winter lets shafts of sunlight in, the view towards the lake, where you step out from onto a private garden. As you move onto the lake in a boat, you see the building lightly perched on the dam. Towards the right corner, you see the reception, bar, and restaurant. In form inspired by traditional pavilions of the region. The building is lightly perched off the dam similarly, with a wraparound veranda, and the pool on the sunken side of the dam seems to cascade down into a traditional stepwell, which also forms the entry plaza. The construction system uses no concrete, is a composition of hand-carved regional sandstone clamped onto a steel structure, and where people touch the stone, it is hand-chiseled. The air conditioning grills are hand-cut at site. This is how the building sits on the dam, the veranda with its sunrise view, the courtyard between the baradari and the tents. The interior borrows on the same narrative of the textiles, interpreted as hand-chiseled patterns on stone, also translated into this hand-carved bar unit with migratory flamingos that visit the lake in winter. The sundowner veranda overlooking the forest. The kitchen block made of reclaimed stone that we got from site as we dug up the foundations of the old tents. And the stepwell built around an old temple that existed at site, which blesses all guests as they arrive and depart. Together with the owners, we found a way to keep the women from the neighboring communities actively engaged in the upkeep of the decor through traditional decorations in the landscape, inserts with mud and lime, such as these hand-painted patterns in the courtyards, and even the numbering of the rooms, all of which need to get redone every few weeks. This is a video capturing the experience of being at site. I'd move now to a different context in the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand, which is slightly northeast of Himachal, which you'd seen earlier, where we worked on a 100-acre site, the passion project of a private client who loved the hills and wanted to develop an eco-conscious gated community. The biggest problem in these hills is the impact of rampant unplanned construction and the torrential rains in the region, which cause severe erosion and landslides. And in spite of all the rain, there's a scarcity of water for human consumption. Together with the landscape architects, we developed an ecology-first master plan, first mapping the natural water runoffs and green belts, around which we developed our road networks and the location for the houses and hotel, which got translated on site in the manner in which the roads are cut, with minimal cut and fill, and very small dry gabion retaining walls. Slope stabilization is done using bioengineering methods of hydroseeding, bamboo crib walls, and brush layering. For water retention and management, we build about 300 micro check dams of dry stone across the swales on site, which over a period of 3 years alone have not only retained water for the site, but have regenerated the artisanal wells of the villages downstream, which were dry for years. This has begun to revive the entire ecosystem of underground aquifers, creating a remarkable transformation. The houses themselves are collection points for rainwater. The water collected from the rooftop of one home gets used by the home downstream through a gravity-fed network. The wastewater too gets recycled and used in a similar fashion. We've tried to build in areas on site which are non-productive, on slopes virtually impossible to build on in traditional methods of construction. We developed a construction technique with almost no cut and fill, with minimal alteration of the slope of the hill. To ensure the surrounding trees and slopes do not get damaged, we developed a construction technology where we didn't need cranes or heavy machinery to build. This model shows the very strong basket-like weave of 100 mm cross-sectional steel pipes, which create the superstructure such that each module for construction is less than 100 kilos, enabling 3 to 4 people to move each module manually for assembly. This superstructure stilts the house off the ground, allowing rainwater to flow through. Thereafter, a multi-layered dry construction system creates a highly insulated shell that achieves passive house standards. The structure could be erected rapidly, with the trees around still intact. Timber and slate as the facade rain screens. You can see here the weave of the metal structure expressed on the outside and inside as the walls slice through. Hand-carved details by local craftsmen welcome you into the house. The outside and the inside connect strongly, both in terms of the way the house connects with the courtyards and the way the balconies perch out into the trees. The house here encapsulated within the trees as it disappears within the forest, which was the primary intent of the project. Back to Rajasthan. First in the historic city palace of Jaipur, where we were invited to refurbish a small cafeteria within the precinct of the City Palace Museum. The brief was to refurb the old cafe to create a new destination for tourists and locals alike. We proposed rearticulating the central courtyard by replacing a vestigial service block with a new connecting pavilion and opening up a new entrance from the city so that the space becomes a connector to the city for the museum after closing hours. We began to strip off layers of cement plaster and paint from the relatively poor renovations that had been done over time to reveal the spectacular stone masonry beneath, which we repaired using lime mortar, which was made at site. These are before and after images of the same space, how the reinterpretation worked. Delightful transformations became possible. This old office block on the left got converted into a lounge. The buildings started to speak of the history through their materials. We conceptualized a lightweight contemporary pavilion that anchored the two courtyards and housed an island bar within it, made entirely in a lightweight metal frame and handcrafted local marble, which was honed down to a thickness which made it translucent and created a dialogue between the old and the new. We reinterpreted other craft, such as this traditional hand-cut tikri mirror work, so the image on the left shows how it is used traditionally, and we converted it into newer, more graphic motifs that find place through different zones of the project. We developed different weave patterns for furniture that was made locally based on textiles of the region, which all come together as a tapestry of texture and gives the city a new watering hole that looks to the future while celebrating its past. We addressed a very different concern in the same city more recently when we were asked by a leading jeweler to build a new retail store for her. We were handed a plot with this structure which had been recently built by her, and she was unhappy with the way the building was shaping up and brought us in. She asked us to bring the structure down and give her something spectacular. We felt it would be criminal to waste this newly built sturdy concrete frame by bringing it down. So instead, we retained the structure, reshaped the slabs, scooped out connections, and reworked the facade to create this building, which has a museum on the ground floor that we proposed, a retail space on the lower ground and first, and a proposed cafeteria on the top porous floor with views of the city. In the process, we saved over 1,000 tons of embodied carbon. The handcrafted stone facade echoes the Indo-Saracenic roots of the city's architecture and is a synthesis of the Deco, Mughal, and Rajput styles, all of which have influenced the region. The narratives continues to the interior, where all the multiple retail zones are defined by frescoes done on ceilings painted by Jaipur miniature artists who usually work on an A4 sheet of paper. It took several months of prototyping and us working closely with them to create scales and forms they were unfamiliar with, and they ended up delivering these spectacular hand-painted narratives of the gardens of the region that populate multiple zones as you meander through the store. The project thus becomes a contemporary handmade symbol both for her brand and the city. We've taken this idea of circularity to a new build, where we began to consider the idea of a building that could be reshaped as per emerging needs. This is a competition project we won for a new visitor center at the Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur that's being built at the base of the fort. The building is proposed as an entirely naturally ventilated pavilion stilted off the rocky valley such that it does not alter the natural terrain and flow of rainwater. We propose a building that gets sunk into the valley, that exists south of the entry road leading to the fort, becoming the gateway to the fort below the datum of the road. The new building is sited in place on the old structure that had to be partly demolished, as the purpose it had been built for had changed. We took our cue from this and proposed looking at the new structure as an adaptable system of metal and stone without using any bonding agents, where the building can be reshaped or dismantled and moved and reconfigured for new uses that might emerge in the future. This system uses 1/3 the amount of stone as the usual solid stone masonry buildings of the region. The modular steel structure is designed such that it can be reconfigured easily and is designed to take in stone panels 3.1 meters tall and 50 mil thick from the neighboring quarry again, either as insulated double-skinned walls or as brise-soleil screens. The building is made with horizontal shelves and lintels that slide in as a system of assembly which can be disassembled if needed. The flooring consists of perforated stone slabs slotted onto a metal frame that allows rain to flow through into the hillside. This is the building under construction. This technique allowed us to retain the trees which slice through the structure, how the building sits perched lightly on the edge of the slope, the sun-shading lattice walls that create a porous, naturally ventilated space. Artisans once again breathe life into the smooth quarry-cut stone slabs. The project is a prototype which appropriates engineering and craft as a synergetic whole and proposes a system that's rooted in the region, yet creates solutions that are circular, frugal, and forward-looking. So this brings us to how we've kind of evolved our way of working from the kind of projects that I've shared, which has brought to us a learning that a classical kind of determinist model where the architect is the author and directs everyone to follow their instructions allows lesser degrees of freedom for other stakeholders to contribute to the creative process, rather than a more participatory model such as this, which is slightly more emergent, that allows multiple stakeholders to shape the final project, often producing a richer outcome. This process needs our drawings and approach to be flexible enough to allow for an improvement or contribution at different stages of the project, which is difficult but immensely rewarding. So then what becomes important really is not the design vision of one person or the author, but more a process that can empower and engage people deeply at each stage of the process. That's something we've tried to bring into the organizational design of our studio over time. We're continuing to work on it. We realized early on that design driven primarily by the principles of partners has its own limitations, and early on looked at processes of collaboration which included other team members and clients, of course, and now have begun to start thinking of the studio as something that is alive beyond the walls of the studio, as our values get shared and articulated and seeded in different stakeholders, who then become our partners in thought. For instance, we work extensively with our studio alumni as an extended network. Our consultants, our contractors, artisans, vendors, all become participants in the process. The more boundaries we remove, greater the innovation we are able to harness. What then keeps us together, what then guides this process, is really a set of internal guiding principles which has evolved over the years. It is the glue that holds it all together. Each of these have been defined in some detail. I'll give you some sense, maybe through a couple of examples. So one of the values is trust. It's critical for the process. We believe that each person will strive to do their best if they're given the opportunity. Thus, our focus as a studio is to create the right conditions for this to happen within the studio and the project. And you can only do that when you view the people you work with not as a means to achieve your vision, but as custodians of the process. This is something that has become a cornerstone for our studio, where we attempt to harness the genius of all the stakeholders who form this extended team. To illustrate these in action more clearly, I'll share one last project where we had the opportunity to design offices for the Department of Agriculture for the state of Odisha, which Igor briefly mentioned, which included a farmers' learning center. We suggested to the clients opening up this facility to the citizens of Bhubaneswar. Indian cities don't really have much space in the public realm for citizens. So we did so by lifting up the offices, freeing up the ground plane to create a free-flowing space that connects to the city at stilt level. So while the top 3 floors are the offices, the ground plane opens up to the street by sharing amenities such as a library, auditorium, and training rooms, a cafeteria, exhibition gallery, and the gardens. This can then be used for events, workshops, and for people to wander through well after offices close late in the evening. While the architecture of the building is very striking, one of the things I'll dwell on for a bit is the idea of adaptive thermal comfort, which came into play strongly in our proposal for the project. We've been trying to move away from this idea of a common benchmark of thermal comfort. In India and elsewhere, most current debates are around raising set points of aircon, maybe from 22 degrees Celsius to 26 degrees Celsius. Sorry, I should have converted that into Fahrenheit. The question we asked is comfort defined by whom and for whom? So if you see these two people, one in Kashmir in the north, one in Kerala in the south, they clearly have different expectations of thermal comfort, but yet we are trying to find that common benchmark. So when you begin to understand where you're building and who you're building for, what the current levels of comfort are, you can set up the standards of comfort based on the past and present context. When we dress appropriately and are in tune with our bodies and the outdoors, our body is comfortable with lesser variations in temperature. For Bhubaneswar, we found this temperature to be 84 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, with a slow-moving wind speed of 1 meters per second hitting our skin through high-volume fans. We designed a night purging system for 85% of the building, which uses the drop of 12 degrees between morning and evening temperatures in the peak of summer as the cool night air becomes our cooling device. The building has a high thermal mass, which stores the coolth. So in the evening, when the office is shut and the temperatures fall, this cool air gets drawn into the building, gets stored in the walls, the furniture, the partitions, and the warm air is sucked out through the solar chimneys towards the courtyards. In the day, these vents close once the temperatures begin to rise. Fans come on when people walk in, and the entire thermal mass of the building acts like a giant cooling sink. Post-occupancy analysis has shown tremendous success in peak conditions to meet the Indian IMAC standards. Most importantly, the building consumes 1/3 the energy consumption of what are set as the national GRIHA Green Building Performance Targets for office buildings in 2030 to meet India's SDGs. Here you can see all the corridors which are naturally ventilated and shaded, and the building with its courtyard morphology. The building's facade pattern has a strong identity derived from the textile weaves of the region. We used 4 colors of brick using 4 colors of clay, which represent the different soils of the state as louvers which shade the glazing and give identity to the building, creating a graphic expression that celebrates the region. and moves away from the usual aspiration, especially in Indian smaller cities, for the contemporary expression they seek through steel and glass. We convinced the government to become patrons and give patronage to a body of regional skills and craft at an architectural scale. It was interesting for us to find that most artisans in the region are farmers who work as artisans part-time in non-farming seasons. We were fortunate to find a local architect from the city of Bhubaneswar to run this part of the program for us. We created the brief, created the canvas of the public spaces, and then left it to him and the craftspeople to take ownership of the project and lead this crafts program. For this to really succeed, we had to let go of trying to control the process and work in a more kind of facilitating and collaborative way, really trusting the process. They created narratives at site around mythology, so there were 50 people working for 6 months at site around agriculture, all related to the theme of the land and something that's familiar to the locals, such as these condylite stone lotuses that are cast into the roof slabs, or then the way the service shafts were screened in hand-carved stone lattices, the way the dead walls of large mass of the auditorium were carved in situ with larger-than-life paddy crop, the bastar metalwork of that region used as screens and lighting devices, also as building signage, how the building sits in context of the city, and I'm going to leave you with a video that captures what the experience of the artisans working on the project was.
We were quite excited, with the quantum of work that could be generated if artisans, if craft and architecture could come together. And I think that has been a big achievement, that this building project could generate work for about 50 artisans for a continuous 6 months. And we actually got, artisans who had stopped working with the traditional skills. We convinced them to come back and to start working again.
काम करुले सेमान भी सेमती के निर्दिष्ट गोटे ही काम भितर रही चिंताधाराटा से गोटे भितर रही निर्दिष्ट मूर्ति बनवारे चिंताधाराटा से भितर सीमित थिला जार फल यही कामटा कृषि भवन काम कर आम मान को देखागला प्रकृत में आम आम कलाटा को केमतिका अन्य दृष्टि भी देखि परिबा.
It's a perfect setting for us where we could bring in artisans and craft. If you talk of farmers and if you talk about people coming from villages to this building, then we want to show them something that's familiar to their environment, and that is where craft comes in.
Thank you.